To make your art bigger without destroying its quality, we can utilize Photoshop and a method known as upscaling. Basically, any version of Photoshop that's relatively new will allow you to do this. So right off the bat, before you even design, you want to prepare your file so that it's 300 dpi and as big as you can physically get it before you start to run into hardware or software limitations. I have this drawing right here in Procreate, and I need to make it bigger. It's designed at 7 by 7 inches at 300 dpi, and I'm gonna push this to like 20 by 20 inches in Photoshop. So I'm gonna increase the size of this almost 3 times the size of the original design. So the first thing I need to do is get this drawing onto my computer. So I'm going to export my drawing in Procreate as a Photoshop file, and then I'm going to send it to my computer using Google Drive, but you can use basically anything. You could use Gmail, AirDrop, or whatever you prefer. If the program you're using doesn't let you export as a Photoshop file, PNG is the best alternative. Okay, so I have my Photoshop file open, and we're going to essentially take one last look at it before we upscale it. So I'm going to do a quick review, and I think I just want to add a little bit of vibrance to it. So I'm just going to add a vibrance adjustment layer, and we'll say this is done for the sake of time. We did our review and it looks good to go, so the next step is going to be to export this as a high quality PNG and then upscale that PNG. So you're going to click File, Save a Copy, choose where you want to save it to. Where it says Save as Type, you're going to choose PNG. Click Save, and then you're going to get this PNG format options box. Choose large file size, fastest saving. Click OK, and you're good to go. Now you have a high quality PNG. Really quick, I know it seems counterintuitive to click Save a Copy instead of choosing an option under the Export tab, but for some reason, unless you're on the very newest version of Photoshop, you can't export in a high resolution using those methods. For me, before the recent update, it would always cap my exports at 96 dpi or 96 ppi, even if my file was set to 300. Basically, the save a copy method is tried and true and should work on any version of Photoshop in case you haven't updated yet. Moving on, we're going to open our newly exported PNG in Photoshop. If you did this correctly, you'll notice that the size and the resolution are exactly the same as the original Photoshop file. So now here's where the magic happens. Here is when we're going to start actually upscaling this. You're going to go to Image, Image Size, and then you're going to have this dialog box pop up. So this dialog box is where you can adjust the size of your image. You can also choose if you want the unit of measurement to be displayed in pixels, inches, centimeters, or whatever. You can just pick whatever you want, whatever you prefer. I typically prefer to show the units as inches so I can see what size it would be as a physical product. Anyway, what we're going to do is make sure that resample is checked. Now this is very important. Next to resample, you want to make sure that this is set to Preserve Details 2.0. This is the algorithm that's going to do all of the heavy lifting. So once Preserve Details 2.0 is set, you can type in whatever size you want to scale your image to. Let's say we want this to be like 20 by 20 inches. In this preview here, you can see that it's still really high quality, despite the fact that we just upscaled this like 3 times its original size. So we're going to click OK, and now boom, now you have a bigger image. It's nice and clean, and there's basically no loss in quality. Now, we pushed this hard, like again, 3 times the size. Professionally, I would avoid having to push it this hard. I'll usually push it like 50% of the original size as opposed to 3 times. But for the sake of demonstration, I think it's fine. Typically, like it'll never get you 100% of the way there. It's not completely perfect, but it gets you like 95% of the way there. And if you do zoom in and notice anything weird, just take the time to touch it up. You're already in Photoshop. But yeah, then the last step would be to just save that file that you just upscaled. You can save it as whatever you want, JPEG, PNG, PSD. I typically like keeping it a PNG, but yeah, that's it.
That's it?
So real quick, I want to address a couple questions that you might have. The first question is, why aren't we just upscaling the Photoshop file directly? Like, why are we even exporting it as a PNG? So there are a couple reasons for that. The first reason is, when you upscale a Photoshop file, Photoshop has to read every single one of those separate layers and then try to figure out how to reconstruct them so that they're coherent like they were at the original size. Now, unfortunately, Photoshop is not good at doing this. So if you were to go down that road, you would notice a huge hit to your quality unless your image was flattened first. So to give you an example of this, I upscaled this Photoshop file directly, And you can see if you zoom into the eyes here, there's all of this artifacting going on between these two layers that are sort of touching each other. So the outside layer here is the line art layer, and then the inside is the color layer. If you compare it to what we got when we upscaled the PNG, you can see the PNG has way better quality because it's easier for Photoshop to upscale a flattened image. So that's why we exported it as a PNG in the first place. The other big issue with upscaling the Photoshop file directly is the file size becomes exponentially larger. So even though we increased this by 3 times the size, the file went from 9 megabytes to 465 megabytes. So the file size isn't really proportional to the physical size of the image, right? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like, just because it's 3 times bigger, it doesn't mean that the file size is going to be 3 times bigger or even reflect something similar to that. So basically, to sum it up, we have a lower quality file, and then it's also exponentially larger, so it's just going to chew through your storage space. There's no point in even working with that type of file, in my opinion. Okay, so then the next question you might have is, wait, if we're going to export this as a PNG, why didn't I just directly export it as a PNG from Procreate and then upscale it in Photoshop? Why even create the Photoshop file at all? Well, you can theoretically skip that step and get similar results. But the main reason you should export a Photoshop file is because you want to have the flexibility of being able to edit and review your file while you're on the computer and while you have the layers still separated versus having to go back to, say, your iPad and then edit it on the iPad, then re-export it, re-share it, re-download it, and then reopen it on the computer. Those are just unnecessary steps, and I think this way gives you a much more efficient workflow. So anyway, I hope that helps. I hope you learned something. This was the culmination of a lot of trial and error, trying to figure out this process on my own because I couldn't find anybody that compiled all of this into a single coherent tutorial. Thank you so much for getting this far. It genuinely means the world to me. If you want to like and subscribe, that's fine too, no pressure. But definitely drop a comment if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. Lastly, if this kind of thing helps you, you might be interested in checking out my Instagram at Skycave Studios. Over there I post some tips, art breakdowns, and behind the scenes videos that could help you along the way. And of course my art is over there if you're interested in that as well. Thank you once again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.